Good morning and welcome to today's New Era educational webinar, Planning and Executing a Governance Plan for Microsoft Teams. For those that have been attending our webinars routinely, I'm glad you're able to join today. If this is your first webinar with us, thank you, and I hope you find today's content relevant and helpful. Jeremy, if you don't mind just forwarding the slide. I'm Joe Paquette. I'm the Business Development Director in the Northeast at New Era, and soon I'll be joined by Jeremy Morrell. Our agenda today will include, as you can see here, planning and executing a team's governance plan. We'll talk about the whys and the hows, and I think most importantly here, Jeremy's going to have an extensive demo to sort of give you that advice and guidance we talked about. At the end, we'll talk about our resources. And along the way, if you have questions, please put those in the chat. If we don't get to them during the event, we'll definitely follow up after the fact. And I do want to state there's really three goals for today's webinar. One, we hope to provide information and advice to you that is new, something you haven't seen before. We really want this to be relevant to your needs, especially if it addresses a current or pressing issue that you have. And I imagine because we're all in this webinar today, this information is relevant. And thirdly, we want to demonstrate how we can partner with you to help solve any of these issues you may have. All set, Jeremy. So what are we really talking about? You know, imagine if we could deliver Teams to users securely and in a manner that meets your governance and compliance requirements. That's really what we're focusing on today. And to that end, what are some of the things we're seeing in the field? No need to read all these, but Jeremy and others on our services organization are meeting with clients. And these are the questions that we're fielding really every day. And I know these are topics that Jeremy is going to go through in today's webinar. And Jeremy, if you forward to the next slide, I think this is really interesting. So instead of gathering maybe data from external resources, this is based on the registration for today's webinar. So you folks attending today, answer these questions and know that among your peers, you're probably all in the relatively same boat. So question one, do you have control over Teams membership rights for guests or non-employees? 3/4 do not. Does your company have a plan to protect confidential or sensitive data? About 1/3, a little more, do, and maybe the others, it isn't a priority. In the last two, again, 3/4 of the audience here, enforcing consistent naming conventions for Teams is important, so perhaps we haven't done that yet. And do we want to limit the creation of Teams to certain users or roles? A big one. I know Jeremy will go over that as well, but again, 3/4 of us on today's call are trying to address the same issue. So again, I thought this was pretty interesting and speaks to today's relevance. So what is the solution? We're going to talk about it. Jeremy's going to show it. It's a Teams governance plan. And you can forward right through, Jeremy. So before we get started, for those that are, again, new to today's webinar, who is New Era? About 1,600 employees, 40+ offices throughout North America and global. If you look to the next slide, Jeremy, you'll see we really have sort of 6 pillars of the company. Today, we'll be focusing on the data networking, which is our Microsoft practice. We'll be touching on a little bit, perhaps, the UC and collaboration. A little teaser for next week. That'll be a big part of our Microsoft Teams Direct Routing webinar, if you can join. And focusing on our Microsoft practice a bit here. The one thing I would take away, you can see some of the core areas, but really from a Microsoft perspective at New Era, our goal is to holistically look at your environment. So today we're focusing on Teams. I know during the presentation, Jeremy will touch upon security measures management, and the like. I know he's going to touch upon the infrastructure of perhaps SharePoint and OneDrive and things like that, which affect this. So really the goal for us always is, as a user, you are consuming Microsoft today. Let's make sure we are leveraging all of the tools available to you, whether they are identity, management, security, or otherwise. If we're consuming it today, let's use it. Let's help you streamline how you can deliver these services to your end users. And Jeremy, I think that's it. I look forward to your demo today, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great, well, thanks a lot, Joe. So I am Jeremy Morrell, Senior Solution Architect here with New Era, and much of my role is helping customers adopt and adapt within the Microsoft ecosystem. We're consistently hearing from our customers that Teams has introduced some burdensome challenges to their IT administration. The default settings allow any user in your company to create their own teams with names that can be cryptic or even inappropriate at times. And as adoption of Teams gains traction, administrators struggle to understand which teams are in active use, which have been abandoned. At best, the result is a polluted list of Teams and SharePoint assets, and at worst, a data governance nightmare. So what is governance? I define governance for Teams as the process of planning and executing a Teams deployment across your organization, and it involves three core areas. There's group and team creation, naming and classification, group and team expiration, retention, archiving, and then feature management within the Teams application itself. And time invested in Teams governance is going to pay dividends after adoption, including a smoother rollout, better user experience, and fewer help desk calls. At least that's the dream. So we'll take the balance of this hour to review the tools available to us to help tackle this challenge head on. And borrowing a play from Microsoft, we'll look at things through the eyes of Alan, an IT administrator at Cutoso Electronics. So Alan's hoping for a smooth and rapid adoption for employees to use Teams effectively. To that end, he'll use administrative tools including Azure Active Directory, PowerShell, the O365 Admin Center, and the Azure AD Admin Center, as well as the Teams Administration Center. So a lot of centers, but they are really well defined as for each intent and purpose, and we'll try to clarify that as we go along. Each of these administrative tools has its own scope of control, degree of flexibility and granularity, and the tools that Alan will use depends on Cutoso's specific needs and requirements. For example, he can control guest access in Teams at the directory, tenant, and application level in Azure AD, or just at the Teams level in the Teams Business Admin Center. On the other hand, he'll use Azure AD Admin Center to set team expiration policies, and we'll use PowerShell to create and enable Teams naming policies. So Teams provides some rich governance tools to implement policies, permissions for creating, naming, classifying teams, and controlling who can use them. So we'll look at the key areas that Alan needs to consider before he deploys Teams. We'll look at groups. Teams is one of several O365 services that's built on top of the groups framework. When someone creates a team, it also creates an Office 365 group as well. By default, any users with a mailbox and Exchange Online have permissions to create O365 groups and therefore a team in Microsoft Teams. Well, that certainly eases the burden of admins who might receive hundreds of requests to create teams, but it can also lead to issues like duplication or inadvertent deletion of all teams and contents. If Alan wants to have tighter control and restrict the creation of new teams, he can delegate group creation and management rights to an O365 security group in the admin center. Now, it's important to note that Teams yields the most benefits when there's a good balance between allowing end users to create the teams they need while restricting an uncontrolled rapid increase in the number of teams being created. Severely restricting the creation of teams isn't something that we would recommend. So for example, here's a Teams governance security group that Alan set up previously. It consists of users that he wants to grant permission to create new teams. This should provide the needed balance without negatively affecting productivity. Take a look at an article here. This is an article that talks about managing who can create the Office 365 group. So we can provide this link at the end of the presentation. Using PowerShell with the existing security group in place, Alan can use Azure Active Directory PowerShell, the module within the PowerShell, to configure the permissions. And this article just explains that a little bit further. And after running these steps, only members of that security group can now create a new team in Teams. And the restrictions can be removed later if necessary. So once you have a handle on it and you really know how Teams works, you've had time to invest in exploring what assets get created. A SharePoint site is a back end of a team as well as an O365 group. And you've got a handle on that. You've got things in place that we'll discuss momentarily, like a naming policy, and you feel good about the administration. You can decide to relax that later on. So by default, anyone who creates a team can name it whatever they wish. However, without proper controls, that can lead to organizational headaches. Let's suppose Contoso has marketing groups in the US, Europe, and China. And we'll say that Megan in the US marketing department creates a team and she calls it Contoso Marketing. Well, what happens when Europe's and China's marketing departments also create teams and call them Contoso Marketing? Now the company has multiple O365 groups called Contoso Marketing, along with their Office 365 groups and the SharePoint site collections that support them. And this can get confusing. Defining a naming convention could benefit this organization in this case. As in that sample case, Alan could limit team names to look something like Contoso Marketing _US, Contoso Marketing _Europe, _China, so on and so forth. To enforce consistent naming conventions, Alan can create a naming policy for Contoso's tenants using the AD PowerShell module. This feature is also partly available in the UI. So while you can use PowerShell and the instructions here are perfectly valid, you will find that in the UI, once you've set those up, you can go back and you can alter them and create new rules as well. So using prefixes or suffixes to communicate the geographic region, as noted before, the function of a group, its membership, or who created the group, those are the types of naming conventions that we would usually advise. Alan can also create a list of blocked words that can't be used in a team or group name. In addition to the obvious ones we're probably all thinking about, ones that might not come to mind immediately but are just as important are thinking payroll, CEO, HR, etc. Things that we want to reserve so that just anyone can't create a team called the HR or human resources team and have that show up to people that may be misdirected in thinking that it's a company sanctioned team or similar. So Alan will set a group naming policy in Azure AD. When a user creates a group in an O365 app, they see a preview of the name according to the naming policy. So with prefixes, suffixes, dashes, however we've set that policy up, that will be what's seen when the user types in the group name. And then if the user enters any blocked words, they'll see an error message so they can remove those words. Alan can follow this article on how to enforce that convention and the groups and thus teams using PowerShell. Let's take a look at Teams itself. Each team created in Teams automatically comes with an O365 group that has a configurable status of public or private, and optionally classifications that are labels administrators like Alan can use to create policies for retention and other content-related requirements in O365. In the upper right-hand corner, notice how it says private for this team. Let's take a look at team settings. So for example, the admin can allow users to set public, internal only, or restricted on teams they create. Alan previously used PowerShell to create a data classification system for Contoso's teams. So he's got different classifications and the descriptions there. Team owners can set or change the classification anytime they like when they create the team, or they can do it later under the classification options. As the number of teams increases, it can get a bit of a mess. So for instance, when the project's completed for a given team, the O365 group's still hanging around. So let's take a look at groups in Azure AD. The teams can, it now shows owners when their team's going to expire. That is, if they use an Office 365 groups expiration policy. So we'll look at the expiration settings. Alan can manage the life cycle of teams by setting an expiration policy in the Azure AD Admin Center. A policy can be set for groups, specific selected groups, or none of the groups. Now, Alan will select some of them to expire in 365 days, so a year. Once Alan sets a group to expire, owners of the team or group are notified to renew the group as expiration nears. Let's pick some groups. Any team or group that isn't renewed will be deleted, and the Office 365 team or group that's deleted can be restored within 30 days by the group owners or the administrator. Team owners can archive a team when it's no longer active, but they want to keep it for reference or to reactivate it in the future. An example of this that I recently used with one of our customers was they created a onboarding team specific to bringing in new employees to the organization, and they put assets out within the team, such as the employee handbook and things that were generally static, not subject to change, maybe might change seasonally or once a year. They took that team and they archived it because it is still accessible. So conversations and files become read-only once they're archived. Users can still search through it to find what they need, but all activity from a teamwork perspective is frozen once the team's archived. No one can start a new conversation, no one can reply to posts in a channel, add or remove channels, edit team settings, apps, etc. Team owners will still be able to add or remove members, update roles, and delete or restore the archived team itself. All right, now look at the Security and Compliance Admin Center. We'll talk about data governance specifically and retention. So for most organizations, the volume and complexity of their data is increasing daily. Emails, documents, Teams messages, etc. To manage or govern this information, it's important that admins they look at complying proactively with industry regulations, internal policies that require organizations to retain content for a minimum period. For example, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act might require you to retain certain types of content for 7 years. Admins will want to reduce their risk in the event of a litigation or security breach by permanently deleting old content that organizations are no longer required to keep. And they want to help the organizations share knowledge effectively, be more agile, and ensure that their users work only with content that's current and relevant. So with Teams retention labels and policies, admins like Alan can decide proactively whether to retain content, delete content, or both. Retain and then delete the content based on time. Policies get applied by using content labels that can either be auto-applied or applied by users. So here, Alan reviews a label for content that contains PII, person identifiable financial information in this case. So a credit card or bank account numbers. When content containing personal financial PII is discovered, it's retained for 3 years, then deleted. If a new retention label and policy is needed, Alan can go ahead and create a new one. So create a new. Let's take a look at the Teams Admin Center specifically, and we'll look at meetings and policies for meetings. So meeting policies are used to control what features are available to users when they join the Teams meeting. Initially, policies are configured at the global level. So Alan can use the default org-wide global policy, or he can create a more customized one for people that host meetings in the organization. The global policy's got default settings that many organizations could use out of the box. If Alan creates a policy with custom settings, he can then assign specific users or groups to the policy. General meeting settings cover areas such as enabling the Meet Now function, channel meeting scheduling, and the Outlook add-in. Audio and video settings include transcription, recording, and media bitrate. Content sharing settings include screen sharing, giving and requesting control, sharing a PowerPoint deck. Participants and guest settings include dial out to other participants, enabling any user to start a meeting and automatically admitting participants. Let's go ahead and create a new policy. Now, existing policy could be changed or saved, or Alan could start a new policy from scratch. Let's talk about live events. Just briefly here, with Teams live events, users in Contoso could broadcast video and meeting content to large online audiences. Live events brings live video streaming to a new level. It encourages connection throughout the entire management lifecycle with attendees before, during, or after events. Live event policies are used to manage event settings for groups of users. And Alan can use the global org-wide policy to create new policies and assign them to users. Live event policies have options like allowing scheduling to go ahead and pre-schedule a live event. Allowing transcription for attendees, setting who can join scheduled live events, so everyone in the organization or specific users and groups. And recording settings, always, never, or organizer of the meeting only. Messaging policies are used to control what chat and channel messaging features are available to users and teams. As in the case of meetings and live event policies, Alan can use the default org-wide global policy or create one or more custom messaging policies for people in the organization. And there's a number of options in a messaging policy, and there include things like whether owners and or individual users can delete or edit a sent message and enabling read receipts. Also things like enabling chat, enabling Giphies or controlling the content rating. Memes, stickers, conversations, allowing URL previews. Sorry, step back there. Message translation. Let's create a new policy. The global policy bars owners from deleting sent messages, but also allows users to delete or edit them. The chat, Giphies, memes, and stickers are all allowed, as are URL previews and translation of messages. So that sort of effectively wraps up my demo and hopefully it gives you a bit of a better insight into the biggest focus areas for managing successful deployment. So even if your organization is small and the decision making is fairly cut and dry, an awareness of these settings is key to solid administration. With that, I'll hand it back to Joe, who has a question for you all.
Thanks, Jeremy. Um, yeah, how can we help? Really, if we harken back to the goals of today's webinar, it was to hopefully provide some information that was new to you. Hopefully information was relevant to the needs. And then thirdly, how can we help? We want to demonstrate how we can partner with you to help solve any of these issues. So if you move ahead, Jeremy, you can see sort of three offerings. The first two are Teams related. This is a Teams assessment. In this assessment, you can see what we'll accomplish here. So review the current applications and Teams functionality. We'll do a licensing review. Perhaps you're looking to expand your Teams to direct routing. Let's make sure you have the proper licensing. And we'll provide an executive level finding document after this discovery session, sort of saying, hey guys, here's where you're at. You've communicated these are your goals and here's what it might take to get there. This is an assessment. At the end of the event, you'll have a survey. You can select that assessment. And Jeremy, if you go to the next one, this has been really popular for our user base. This is a Teams 101 customer training, and what it really is having Jeremy or another architect with you. We'll have 2 one-hour training sessions. It'll be a 45-minute presentation with 15 minutes of Q&A. It will be recorded on your tenant. So moving forward, if you had a new hire, if you are to review that training, you could repurpose this anytime you want. Jeremy and team would work with you prior to provide some slight customization where it makes sense, and we would deliver that training to you. And then lastly, Jeremy touched upon security a little bit. This is near and dear to Jeremy's heart, which is why I sort of included it today. Identity and access management are probably about as high on the priority list of Microsoft that you can be. If you are unsure of what's available to you today, if you want to explore how to truly manage your assets via identity, which is really the direction Microsoft is taking, this is a great working session. You can see here what would be offered during that session. And it's, again, as easy as selecting that in the post survey. All set, Jeremy. So Kristen, I don't know if there's any questions in the chat box. I don't think so.
Nothing so far.
Great. So if, Jeremy, if we close out, I think as we're doing this, we'll see some upcoming events here. I do want to make sure that we were able to identify what's relevant for you guys, and if we can, understand the priorities you might have, and if we can assist, fantastic. Next week, a very important webinar again on Microsoft Teams. We'll be talking about direct routing. So for those that are considering moving Teams out of the enterprise a little bit, we'll talk about Teams direct routing. We'll talk about collaboration of your existing UC platform via Cisco or other, if you want to leverage that, how to work those things together. And we'll actually be touching upon a neat conferencing solution to allow sort of the user experience of a one-touch dial through Teams with other collaboration tools like a Cisco collaboration tool. So great event next week, and next month you'll see a neat recap of Microsoft Ignite. We'll be talking about some of the top 10 security topics from Microsoft, and then you can see into May's event. So with that, I truly want to thank everyone for attending today. Jeremy, as always, thanks for your content. Great job. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to your New Era rep. You can reach out to myself or Jeremy as well. Thanks all. Take care.